Hey, Bob, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jason. How are you? Thanks for inviting me on today.
Bob, you have a wealth of knowledge, but today I want to particularly talk about a case that you represent some victims in a Ponzi scheme. Now, as you know, we do some white collar criminal defense, but we don't really see kind of like the back end of a lot of these cases where people have been defrauded out of money. How do you go about to try to get them their money back?
Sure. I had a case a couple of years ago where I was representing a couple of physicians that were defrauded in a foreign currency trading Ponzi scheme. It was called an affinity scheme where it's done within a particular community. In this case, it was a Lebanese community. One of the first things I look for when I start talking to the victims of a Ponzi scheme is, have they informed the authorities? Have they informed the FBI? Have they informed the Securities and Exchange Commission, which often times may have an interest in frauds of this type of nature? So, one of the things I check with my clients is, have they reached out to the FBI? Have they reached out to the SEC? And I worked with them, in that process of making sure that the authorities are informed. That's the first step. And then I then worked with them as the next step in pursuing the fraudster civilly. And I can talk about that as well.
Right. You were talking about earlier about how in this particular situation, you found some creative ways to find assets to recover some of the funds.
Yeah. So, it started off with filing lawsuits separately for each of the victims. I found out through actually discussions with my clients, as well as just looking through land records, property records in Northern Virginia, where this fraud initially occurred, as to assets owned by the fraudster. So the fraudster owned a home with his spouse, but he also had 3 condominiums that he was renting out as rental properties as assets. So we the first thing to do is evaluate, are there monies out there that if you pursue the fraudster where you might be able to satisfy judgments? And we proceeded initially with the clients to file civil actions against the fraudster and his wife. They were initially defended, but then the fraudster and his wife fled back to Lebanon, where they were originally from. So we ended up taking default judgments against the wife and the fraudster and the fraudster's company.
Now, not only in this situation, but other situations where you represent victims, is there any way to attach like international property or international bank accounts, or is just whatever's here in the United States?
I have found, this was the instance in terms of me personally of dealing with an international fraud. I think, for me, this was a case where we looked primarily in the United States. One interesting wrinkle I didn't tell you about is the fraudster, after about 1.5 years after he fled to Lebanon, died, unfortunately. But he did have insurance policies, and we checked on life insurance policies because one of my clients had heard back when he was trying to negotiate with the investors that he was going to provide at least one policy for their benefit should anything happen with this company. And so we then, notified the insurance carrier once we knew of his death that there were investors who had been defrauded, and my clients by that time had judgments from Virginia courts to pursue. So the insurance company, it's called an interpleading action, interpled those funds into the federal court in Northern Virginia. So in my case, it was all U.S. assets, but I think, in larger frauds, I think you can look outside of the United States. I think it just becomes really challenging and expensive to pursue assets abroad. And in many of these cases, there's not a silver lining at the end. There's not a lot of assets to pursue, and you consume a lot of resources in terms of attorney's fees pursuing them outside of the U.S.
And it really didn't matter in your case, I guess, because you were saying how you were able to get back every dollar that your investors put in before trial even.
Yeah. So, I mean, the wrinkle in this case was we foreclosed on one of the condominiums. that provided some funds, but very small in terms of the overall fraud that went to my clients, and to there was also monies owed to the condominium association, so it went to satisfy those amounts. But the real source for most of the funds in the case were the life insurance policies, and there were 4 of them.
Oh, wow.
One of the policies was about $2.5 million, and the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, who by that point in time was actively involved in pursuing the fraudster, basically agreed to a settlement with the fraudster's widow to surrender that insurance policy as disgorgement, and that money was that group of monies were then used to pay out to investors, including my client. And there were, I don't know, probably close to 30 investors who were taken advantage of. But then, for my clients, there were 3 other policies. And in the interpleader lawsuit, there was my clients and 4 other investors. And we worked through court-ordered mediation. I settled out one of my clients on part of his claims. The other client wanted to go to trial, and on the day of trial, the fraudster's wife, who was supposed to travel from Lebanon, did not make the flight over to trial, and so her attorney was in more of a settlement mode, and we ended up settling out my other client, as well as the original client who had settled most of his claims had 1 claim remaining. And, it's one of these rare, great stories. My clients ended up recovering not only their full amounts that they lost in the investment scam, they had also, one of my clients had obtained punitive damages as an award in the civil case, and he recovered that. The other client, the judge had not awarded punitives. That's the problem in Virginia. You get different judges and different results. But both judges in those cases and their judgments had also provided for some pre-judgment interest and post-judgment interest. Interest rate in Virginia is 6%. So my clients also recovered the attorney's fees for just obtaining the judgments, not for my work in the federal interpleader case. But all told, at the end of the day, they came out with the full amount they were defrauded, plus additional monies.
Wow, Bob, that's amazing. So when you're not wearing a cape and saving the world, what do you do in your day job? Tell us when people should be calling you, Bob, when they have any particular issues and legal issues.
So I run the gambit in terms of litigation. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm located in Northern Virginia, but I'm barred in not only in Virginia, but the District of Columbia, regularly practice in the federal court in DC, as well as the DC Superior Court, the federal and state courts in Virginia. And I've in the last year been barred in Maryland, so I've started undertaking some representations there. I'm primarily a civil commercial litigator. I have handled some white collar criminal matters, but where I tend to get involved on the in the securities context or these securities enforcement type cases. During the course of my career, I used to be a partner at a big law firm and handled securities enforcement cases there. I spent 6 years at the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board in the Division of Enforcement. And in that capacity, I investigated accounting firms like Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, KPMG, and smaller firms who did public issuer audit work. Oftentimes, my cases had parallel investigations by the SEC of the company. And a lot of these are triggered by restatements by companies restating their financials, or frauds within companies where they look to the auditors to see whether there are red flags. So I had this practice where I represent now accountants and accounting firms before the Securities and Exchange Commission and before the PCAOB.
So Bob, the toughest question of the interview. Now we're in the thick of it in terms of winter. Give us a thing that you like that we can look forward to in the spring.
Well, in terms of a personal hobby of mine, I enjoy golf. So I'm looking forward to playing golf in the spring and hopefully this pandemic will have receded a little bit.
So a follow-up question to that. If you could, maybe you already played there, what is the best or maybe your dream golf course that you would play on if you had an opportunity?
Oh my gosh, I guess like within the United States, I'd love to go out and play Pebble Beach in California someday. And then I'd love to go to Scotland and play the old course at St. Andrews where golf originated. This year I managed to go to, or I should say actually this past year, because it's 2021, I went down for a bar conference in Charleston, South Carolina, and got to play the Kiowa Ocean course, which I'd always wanted to play. It was a gorgeous day in the low 80s, and it was amazing. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thanks for coming on today. Let's talk again soon.
Sounds good, Jason. Thanks for inviting me. Take care.